I was already 6 minutes behind schedule when I saw the silver Honda pulled onto the shoulder with its hazard lights blinking. A young woman was crouched beside the front passenger tire, one hand on a Caesar jack and the other holding her phone like she was trying to decide whether the instructions on the screen were lying to her. The tire was completely flat, and the jack was sitting several inches from where it needed to be. I almost kept driving, because the garage opened at 8 a.m., and my manager had a very specific opinion about technicians who arrived after customers. Then she leaned harder on the jack handle. The car shifted slightly, and I hit my turn signal. My name is Reid Mercer, I'm 32, and fixing cars for a living has permanently damaged my ability to ignore somebody about to put 2,000 pounds of vehicle on the wrong piece of metal. I parked my truck ahead of her Honda and walked back wearing the navy work shirt that already had Mercer stitched over the pocket. She stood when she saw me coming and immediately said, "I know how this looks." I glanced at the jack, then at the owner's manual open on her phone. "Like you're negotiating with it." She looked down at the car. "We're not on speaking terms anymore." That made me smile, but I pointed toward the frame before touching anything and told her the jack was in the wrong place. She introduced herself as Paige Nolan and said she had noticed that part shortly before deciding the entire automotive industry was built on spite. I asked if she wanted help, and Paige looked at my shirt before answering. "You actually work on cars." I told her I was an automotive technician and was currently proving that employment by becoming late for it. She laughed and stepped aside, but when I reached for the jack, she stopped me. "Wait, can you show me what I did wrong first?" Most stranded drivers wanted the problem gone as quickly as possible, which was reasonable. Paige wanted to understand why she had almost made it worse. I showed her the reinforced jack point beneath the rocker panel, explained what she had been looking for, and then handed the jack handle back to her. She stared at it and then at me. "You're making me do it?" I told her. She was the one who asked to learn. I thought professionals enjoyed showing off. I leaned against the fender and said I charge extra for showing off. Paige rolled her eyes, repositioned the jack, and started raising the car herself. She was wearing jeans, sneakers, and a university sweatshirt, and the longer we worked, the more obvious it became that she was not pretending helplessness to keep me there. She asked practical questions, remembered the answers, and only swore once when the first lug nut refused to move. I loosened that one for her, then let her handle the others. Paige watched exactly where I placed my hands and asked why I cracked the lug nuts loose before lifting the wheel completely off the ground. I explained it, and she nodded like she was filing the information somewhere for later. When the spare came out of the trunk, she looked at its narrow size and said, "That thing looks like it belongs on a shopping cart." I told her not to insult the tire that was about to save her morning. "You're very emotionally attached to temporary spare tires." Occupational hazard. By then I had stopped checking the time every 30 seconds. The whole job took maybe 15 minutes once the jack was positioned correctly. I tightened the lugs in a star pattern, lowered the car, then made Paige do the final check while I explained the speed limitation on the spare and told her where the nearest tire shop was. She repeated the important parts back to me without prompting. That impressed me more than it probably should have. When I finally stood, wiped my hands on a shop rag, and told her she was good to go, Paige looked from the repaired wheel to me. So I technically changed my first tire. I told her she had completed approximately 60% of one. "That's rude. I was going to give you partial credit for helping." I laughed, glanced at my phone, and saw exactly how late I had become. "I really have to go." Paige thanked me, this time without joking, and I told her it was no problem. I had already taken 2 steps toward my truck when she called my name. When I turned around, she was standing beside her open driver's door with her phone in one hand. "Can I get your number?" For a second, I assumed she wanted it in case the spare started acting strange, which told you something about how my brain worked before coffee. "Sure," I said, walking back. "If the car starts pulling badly or you hear anything weird, stop driving and call the tire shop first." Paige held the phone out, but didn't let go when I reached for it. "Reid." I looked at her. She had a small smile now, the kind that made it clear I had answered a different question from the one she had asked. "I didn't say I wanted your number for the tire." That landed a lot more cleanly than anything involving a wrench had that morning. I took the phone, entered my number, and handed it back while trying not to look as surprised as I felt. Paige sent me a quick text so I would have hers, and my phone buzzed in my pocket almost immediately. "Now you know it's me," she said. I asked whether I should save her as wrong Jack Point. She told me that would guarantee I never heard from her again, then paused and added, "Actually, that's probably not true." I liked the way she said it, casual enough to leave me room but deliberate enough that I could not pretend she had only been grateful. Before getting into her car, she looked back at me and said, "I might have another question later. It probably won't be about tires." I arrived at the shop 23 minutes late and spent most of the morning telling myself the encounter had been interesting because it was unusual. Paige was a college student I had met on the side of the road. I had changed one tire, given her my number, and gone to work. That should have been the whole story. At 6:18 p.m., while I was cleaning up my bay, my phone buzzed with a message from Paige asking whether I worked Saturdays. I told her I did until early afternoon and asked whether the Honda had developed another problem. Her reply came almost immediately. "Nope, car's fine. Are you free after work? I want you to teach me how not to need a stranger next time." I read the message twice, mostly because the first reading had given me no useful way to pretend she was only asking about cars. Then another message appeared, and before you overthink it, yes, I'm asking you specifically. I stood beside a half-finished brake job, smiling at my phone like an idiot until one of the guys across the shop asked what was so funny. I put the phone back in my pocket and told him nothing. The problem was that Paige Nolan had already made sure it wasn't nothing. Paige was waiting outside the repair shop at 1:17 p.m. Saturday, with a pair of new work gloves sticking out of her back pocket and a small spiral notebook tucked under one arm. I had expected her to show up with coffee and enthusiasm, not equipment. When I walked out of the bay and locked my toolbox, she held up the notebook. "Before you make fun of me, I have questions." I told her the gloves were what concerned me. "Those still have tags on them." She looked down, tore the cardboard tag off, and dropped it into the trash beside the door. Problem solved. I had spent most of the morning wondering whether she would actually come. Seeing her standing there like she had enrolled in a one-person automotive class made it difficult to pretend I had not been looking forward to it. We used the far end of the shop parking lot, because the bays were still busy, and I started with the things that mattered most if she planned to drive alone after graduation. Tire pressure, where her spare was stored, how to check oil, coolant, and brake fluid, what the warning lights on her dash actually meant, and which problems should make her stop immediately instead of trying to limp the car somewhere. Paige listened for about 3 minutes before reaching for the tire pressure gauge in my hand. "Show me. Don't do it for me." I gave it to her. She checked the first tire wrong, realized it before I said anything, and tried again. By the fourth tire, she was reading the gauge without looking at me, which I liked more than I should have. The pattern continued. If I reached for the hood release, she stopped me. If I pointed at the battery and started explaining terminals, she wanted to touch them herself after I showed her what was safe. When she asked how she would know whether a battery problem was actually the battery, I told her she had just asked a question that kept mechanics employed. Paige flipped open her notebook. "So that's not a 5-minute answer. Not unless you enjoy being lied to." She wrote something down, then looked at me. "You're disappointingly responsible." I asked what she had expected from the guy who stopped on the way to work because she was putting a jack under the wrong part of her car. More swagger. I told her that cost extra, and she smiled because she remembered the joke from the roadside. After an hour, I started testing her instead of explaining everything first. I pointed toward the engine bay and asked what she would check if the car clicked when she turned the key but did not start. Paige frowned, looked at the battery, then at me. "Loose connection before I assume the battery is dead?" I nodded. "Maybe." She narrowed her eyes. "Maybe?" I told her mechanics never rewarded confidence without evidence. She leaned closer to the battery, inspected both terminals, and said she would check whether they were loose or corroded before calling anyone. That was the answer I wanted. Paige looked far too pleased with herself. "You expected me to fail that. I said I expected nothing and trusted measurements. That's mechanic language for yes." What surprised me was that she actually cared about the details. By the time we reached the jack and spare again, she could show me where the lifting point was without hesitation. She even corrected herself when she started putting the lug wrench on before setting the parking brake. I asked why she wanted to learn all of this instead of just joining roadside assistance like a normal person. Paige closed the trunk and leaned against it. "I am joining roadside assistance. I'm not trying to become stranded professionally. Then she explained that after graduation, she wanted to take 3 weeks and drive west before starting whatever came next. She had been saving for it since junior year, and the idea of taking the trip alone was part of why she wanted to understand the car, instead of treating everything under the hood like forbidden territory. That answer changed the picture I had built of her. Until then, I had mostly seen confidence, jokes, and the kind of directness that made asking a stranger for his number seem simple. The trip was different. She had planned it, saved for it, and clearly thought about the parts that could go wrong without using those risks as a reason not to go. I asked where she wanted to stop, and Paige named a loose route through Tennessee, Arkansas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California before admitting she might change half of it once she started. "That's not really a route," I said. "It's a philosophy." She pointed at me. "You repair cars. Stay out of travel planning." We ended up at a burger place a few blocks from the shop because neither of us had eaten lunch. That was the first moment the afternoon stopped having any mechanical excuse attached to it. Paige ordered fries and a milkshake, then caught me looking at the university logo on her sweatshirt. "What?" she asked. I told her nothing, but she waited long enough that I added, "I realized I never asked how old you are." Paige dipped a fry into ketchup. 23. I nodded once. She watched my face and immediately noticed whatever changed there. "How old did you think I was?" I didn't. That sounded convincing. I told her I was 32, and she shrugged like I had told her what size wrench I preferred. I probably should have left it there, but Paige kept watching me. 9 years, I said. "I can subtract. I'm glad college is working out." She smiled, then leaned back in the booth. "Did the fries get worse when I said 23? I laughed despite myself. "No." "Did I suddenly forget how to change a tire?" "You barely know how to change a tire." Paige kicked my shoe lightly under the table. I told her the age difference did not erase the fact that I liked spending the afternoon with her. It just gave me something to think about, because she was finishing college while I had been working full-time for most of a decade. Paige listened without getting defensive, which I appreciated. She took another drink and said, "Thinking is fine. Deciding what I want for me would be annoying." I told her I understood the distinction. Paige nodded, apparently satisfied, then added, "Also, just so we're clear, I asked for your number. You did not lure me into advanced tire maintenance." I almost choked on my drink. She smiled over the rim of her cup. That was Paige's advantage. She could make something direct sound casual without making it meaningless. I asked whether this entire afternoon had been an elaborate excuse to spend time with me. "Partly," she said, "but I really don't want to call some random guy every time my car makes a noise. That's offensive. I'm not random anymore." "Exactly." When we walked back to the parking lot, I stopped beside her Honda and handed her the tire pressure gauge I had been carrying. Paige looked at it. "Am I stealing this?" I told her to consider it homework. The next time something seemed wrong with the car, she had to tell me what she thought the first step was before asking me what to do. Paige slid the gauge into her glove compartment and said, "So I'm allowed to call you?" I looked at her. "You already have my number." That was not the question. I liked the smile she was trying to hide, but I refused to make it easier for her. I told her she could call if she had a real problem. Paige shut the glove compartment. Define real. I should have known better than to give her that much room. As I headed toward my truck, she called after me. "Reid," I turned. Paige leaned against her open door and said, "For the record, today wasn't a car problem." Then she got in before I could answer. I stood there for a second with the uncomfortable realization that I no longer had much uncertainty about whether she was interested. The harder question was becoming what I planned to do about it. The next week started with Paige taking my little troubleshooting challenge much more seriously than I had expected. She sent me a photo Monday morning of her tire pressure gauge showing 31 psi and asked whether she had officially graduated from beginner status. I told her one correctly inflated tire did not qualify as a degree, and she replied that my educational standards were hostile. By Tuesday, the messages had already stopped being entirely about the Honda. She sent me a picture of a terrible sandwich from the campus dining hall, because I had made the mistake of telling her the burger place near my shop was better than anything on campus. I sent back a picture of the vending machine crackers I was eating between jobs, and told her not to judge people from a position of privilege. Somewhere between tire pressure and bad lunches, texting Paige stopped feeling like answering questions and started feeling like part of my day. She still asked real car questions, which was one reason I never felt like she was inventing problems, just to keep me talking. When a yellow warning light appeared on her dash Wednesday, she looked it up before messaging me and correctly identified it as the tire pressure monitoring system reacting to a cold morning. When she heard a brief squeak while braking, she described when it happened instead of sending me the mechanical equivalent of, "Car sounds bad." I told her I was almost impressed. Paige answered almost. I reminded her that she had introduced herself by putting a jack in the wrong place. She said I was going to be unbearable about that until we were 80. I stared at that message longer than the sentence deserved, mostly because she had written it casually and my brain had decided to notice the word "we." Thursday afternoon, I was replacing a water pump when my phone buzzed on the workbench. Paige had sent a picture of her Honda with the hood open in a campus parking lot. The message underneath said, "Car won't start. It clicks once, then nothing. What do I check first?" I wiped my hands and started typing that I could come by after work, then stopped. That was not what I had asked her to do. I deleted the message and told her to start with what she already knew. Less than 2 minutes later, she replied that the lights were coming on normally, then sent another photo of the battery. I zoomed in and could see some corrosion around the positive terminal, but before I answered, another message appeared. "Connection looks loose. I'm checking it. Don't rescue me yet." I laughed hard enough that Marcus, the technician in the next bay, looked over at me. I ignored him and waited. 10 minutes passed, then 15. I had just started wondering whether my experiment in automotive independence had stranded Paige more efficiently when my phone buzzed again. The picture showed the terminal cleaned, tightened, and considerably better than before. Her next message was only 2 words. It started. I called her anyway, and she answered with the engine running behind her. Paige sounded so pleased with herself that I could hear the smile in her voice. She explained that she had borrowed a small wrench from a maintenance guy on campus, disconnected nothing she was not supposed to touch, cleaned the corrosion the way I had shown her, tightened the loose terminal, and tried again. "You didn't call me," I said, and immediately realized how stupid that sounded after I had spent an entire Saturday teaching her not to need me. Paige heard it too. "That was the assignment, Professor Mercer." I told her I was proud of her, which quieted her for half a second before she recovered and informed me that she expected a certificate. Then she added, "I still want coffee." I leaned against my toolbox. "Is something wrong with the coffee machine?" "No." "Does your car require coffee?" "Reid." I smiled. Paige said she would be at a cafe near campus at 6:30 p.m. and asked if I wanted to meet her there. There was no broken part in that invitation, no lesson attached to it, and no way to answer without admitting I understood exactly what she was doing. I told her yes. Paige was already outside when I arrived, sitting at a small metal table with 2 drinks. I parked beside her Honda and out of habit glanced at the front tire as I walked past. Paige caught me immediately. "Don't." I looked at her. "Don't what?" She pointed toward the car. "You're off duty." I told her I had only looked at it. "You looked at it like a doctor who sees someone coughing in public." She pushed one of the drinks toward me. "The car is fine, sit down." I did. And for the first time since meeting her, there was absolutely nothing mechanical for us to discuss unless we chose to. That should have made the conversation harder. It didn't. Paige told me about a presentation she had given that morning and how one member of her group had apparently believed deadlines were suggestions. I told her about a customer who had arrived at the shop convinced his transmission was failing because there was a strange object rolling under his seat. The object turned out to be a bottle of hot sauce. Paige laughed so hard she had to put her cup down, then asked whether I had managed not to charge him for the diagnosis. I told her professional ethics had narrowly survived. We talked about her graduation, my habit of buying old tools I absolutely did not need, the route she was still changing for her trip, and a live music place she wanted to try downtown. Almost 40 minutes passed before either of us mentioned the reason we had originally met. Paige eventually leaned back and looked at me with an expression I had learned, meant she was about to make me uncomfortable on purpose. "Can I ask you something?" I told her that had never stopped her before. "If my battery had been perfectly fine today, would you still have come for coffee?" The question was direct enough that my usual instinct was to inspect it from 6 different angles before answering. I decided not to. Yes. Paige's expression changed slightly. The teasing did not disappear, but something softer moved underneath it. "Good," she said. I asked whether she had expected another answer. I wasn't sure. That surprised me. She had seemed completely certain about my interest from the moment she asked for my number, but confidence apparently did not mean she never wondered. I told her the battery problem had actually clarified something for me. Paige raised an eyebrow. That sounds dangerously serious. I ignored the joke and said that when I saw her message about the car not starting, my first instinct had been to go fix it. Then she fixed it herself, exactly like she said she wanted to. Paige watched me carefully as I continued, and I was a little disappointed. She smiled slowly. Because I didn't need you. Because I wanted a reason to see you. That was the most direct thing I had said since meeting her, and for once Paige had no immediate comeback. She looked down at her coffee, then back at me. You know you're allowed to see me without something breaking, right? I told her I was beginning to understand the concept. When we finally stood to leave, Paige walked with me toward the parking lot, instead of heading directly to her Honda. At her car, she turned and held up the keys. For the record, I think I'm done with lessons for a while. Tire, battery, fluids, warning lights. I can probably keep myself alive. I told her that was an ambitious claim after 1 week. She smiled, but she did not ask when we would meet again. She did not invent another thing she wanted me to teach her. She simply thanked me for the coffee, got into her car, and drove away. I sat in my truck for another minute before starting it. Paige had done exactly what she said she wanted to do. She had learned enough that calling me was no longer her first response when something went wrong. That should have felt like success. Instead, I realized the practical reason for us to keep meeting had just disappeared. And if I wanted another Saturday with her, I could no longer wait for Paige Nolan to manufacture one for me. I made it until Saturday morning before admitting that waiting for Paige to text me again would be exactly the kind of thing she had been teasing me about since we met. Nothing had gone wrong between us. She had not pulled away, and I had not lost interest. We had simply reached the point where the car no longer gave me an excuse to let her create every next step. I checked my phone twice during the morning rush at the shop, caught myself doing it a third time, and finally decided that if I wanted to see her, there was a remarkably advanced solution available. I could ask. I did not offer to inspect the Honda. I did not mention another lesson, her road trip, or anything with an engine. I sent Paige one message asking what time her last class ended Friday. She answered a few minutes later. 3:15. Why? I typed 3 different responses, deleted all of them, and eventually settled on the one that required the least engineering. Because I'd like to take you to dinner. There was a longer pause than I expected before her reply appeared. Look at you asking an actual question. 3:30 works. I told her I would meet her outside the student center, and Paige added, should I bring jumper cables in case you panic? I stared at the screen, laughed, and told her absolutely not. Friday afternoon, I left the shop early enough to go home, shower, and change out of the navy work shirt. Paige had seen me in almost every time we met. That felt more deliberate than I expected. When I parked near campus at 3:27 p.m., I was wearing jeans and a dark button-down, and there was not a socket wrench anywhere in sight. Paige came down the steps of the student center carrying a backpack and slowed when she saw me. She looked me over once, then glanced toward my empty hands. No toolbox, I told her I was trying something new. Dangerous. I was hoping you'd supervise. She smiled and walked straight toward me. I had picked a small Mediterranean place downtown because Paige had mentioned once that she loved anything involving unreasonable amounts of garlic. That detail had stuck with me, which she noticed before we even sat down. You remembered. I told her she had complained for 10 full minutes about restaurants under-seasoning food, so forgetting would have required effort. Paige looked pleased anyway. The conversation felt different from coffee because neither of us could pretend this was an accidental extension of something practical. I had chosen the restaurant, driven to meet her, and asked her there because I wanted a date. That made me more nervous than changing a tire on the shoulder had ever managed. Paige noticed, naturally. Halfway through dinner, she set down her fork and said, "You're thinking too loudly." I asked what that was supposed to mean. You get this little pause before answering when you're editing yourself. I told her she had known me for 2 weeks and should not already have diagnostic procedures. I've had a good teacher. She smiled, but then her expression settled. Is this still about me being 23? I could have dodged it with a joke. Instead, I told her yes, partly. 9 years was not some impossible gap, but she was finishing college while I had been working full-time for almost a decade. I did not want to pretend those differences meant nothing just because I liked her. Paige nodded instead of arguing. That's fair. Then she pointed her fork at me. But there's a difference between noticing it and using it to decide for both of us. I told her I knew that now. More importantly, I told her I was not sitting there because she had convinced me to overlook something. I was there because I liked her. I wanted to see her, and I had finally decided that thinking carefully about a choice did not require avoiding the choice forever. Paige watched me for a second, then smiled. That was almost smooth. I told her I had practiced in the truck. I knew it. After dinner, we walked several blocks instead of heading back to the car. Paige talked about graduation getting close enough that people had started asking what she was doing next, as if she needed a 5-year plan printed on business cards. I asked about the road trip, but for once I did not ask whether the Honda had been checked or whether she had roadside coverage. I asked what stop she was most excited about. She said northern Arizona, then admitted she had deliberately left several days unplanned because she wanted the freedom to change her mind. I understood why that appealed to her. Paige liked knowing she was capable of handling what happened next, without needing every next step decided in advance. At some point she looked over and said, "I was starting to wonder if I'd have to keep opening every door for you." I told her that sounded dramatic, considering we had known each other for less than a month. "I asked for your number. I asked you to teach me. I asked you for coffee." She counted them on her fingers. "You were doing very well at receiving invitations." I laughed because she was right. I told her the battery message had finally made the problem obvious. Once she fixed the car without me, I had felt disappointed because I wanted to see her and suddenly had no useful reason. Paige bumped my arm with hers. "You could have just missed me, apparently. Terrifying diagnosis. No known repair procedure." We reached the parking lot later than either of us had planned. Paige stopped beside my truck instead of immediately walking around to the passenger door. The teasing had gone quieter, and I was suddenly aware of how close she was standing. She looked at me and asked whether I had enjoyed my first completely non-mechanical Paige Nolan appointment. I told her I was considering scheduling another. "That's very professional." "Tuesday?" She smiled. "I'm busy Tuesday." I must have looked disappointed because she added, "Wednesday works." I liked that she did not make me guess whether she wanted another date. There was a brief pause where either of us could have turned toward the truck and ended the moment safely. Paige did not. Neither did I. I touched her hand first, giving her enough time to move if she wanted to, but she curled her fingers around mine and stepped closer. I kissed her, and the thing I remember most was how normal it felt after spending 2 weeks making it complicated in my head. Paige kissed me back without hesitation, then pulled away just enough to look at me. "You know," she said, "that would have been very difficult if I still had to hold a lug wrench." I laughed against her forehead and told her she had ruined a perfectly good moment. I improved it. When I drove her home, there were no tools between us and no unfinished lesson waiting for next time. Paige was leaving for her road trip the following week, which meant the easiest version of what we had been doing was about to disappear anyway. No Saturday lessons, no campus coffee after a battery problem, no reason for her to swing by the shop. But when she got out of my truck, she leaned back through the open door and said, "Wednesday, don't make me remind you." I told her I wouldn't. For the first time since I found her beside that flat tire, I was not wondering whether Paige wanted me around. The question now was what we were going to do when wanting it had to be enough. By the morning Paige was supposed to leave, the Honda was parked outside her apartment, with the trunk packed so tightly that I suspected opening it again would require professional assistance. I met her there before work because she had asked me to, but I made a point of leaving my tool bag in the truck. Paige noticed immediately. She walked around the front of her car, looked at my empty hands, and said, "You're not going to inspect anything." I told her I would if she wanted me to. That answer seemed to surprise her more than if I had started checking fluids without permission. She glanced toward the hood, then shook her head. "No, I checked the oil yesterday, tire pressure this morning, spare is good, battery terminals are clean, and I have roadside assistance now." I nodded. "Then it sounds like you're ready." Paige narrowed her eyes. "That's it?" I told her she had spent weeks telling me not to do things for her. It seemed unfair to ignore her just because I finally had an excuse to worry. She smiled and leaned against the driver's door. Her route would take her west for almost 3 weeks, and there were enough moving pieces in it that the version of me from our first Saturday would probably have asked for every hotel address and fuel stop. I did not. I asked her to text when she reached Nashville that night because I wanted to know she got there safely, then told her I had already kept the following Saturday after her return free. Paige looked at me. "You scheduled me? Dinner. You're assuming I'll say yes." I reminded her that she had spent our entire relationship complaining that I waited too long to act. She laughed, stepped closer and said, "Saturday works." That mattered more than any promise about calling every night. She had a trip she wanted to take, and I wanted her to take it. What I wanted for us did not require me to shrink the rest of her life around it. The first few days went exactly the way they should have. Paige sent pictures from the road when she felt like it. Called me one evening from a motel outside Memphis because she had discovered a barbecue place she claimed would permanently ruin North Carolina for me, and sent another photo the next morning of her checking her own tire pressure with the gauge I had given her. I resisted the urge to comment on every detail. By the time she reached New Mexico, our calls were less about whether the Honda was behaving and more about what she had seen that day. I liked hearing her talk about places I had never been, especially because she never sounded as if she were waiting for permission to enjoy doing something alone. 5 days into the trip, I was finishing a brake job when my phone buzzed. Paige had sent a picture of her rear tire beside a gas pump. A small nail was visible near the center of the tread. My stomach tightened before I even read the message. Then I saw the caption. Caught it before it went flat. Tire shop is 3 miles away. I'm handling it. Don't start driving west. I called anyway, but not to give instructions. Paige answered, laughing. She had noticed the pressure dropping on the dash, pulled into the gas station, checked the tire herself, and already found a nearby shop that could repair it safely. I asked if she was somewhere secure while she waited. She said yes. Then there was a pause before she added, "You didn't tell me what to do." I told her she clearly already knew. "Are you feeling okay?" "It's difficult, but I'm growing." An hour later, another picture arrived, this time of the repaired tire. Under it, Paige wrote, "Fixed it myself." Well, technically a guy named Luis fixed it, but I diagnosed the situation and paid him, so I'm claiming leadership credit. Dinner Saturday? I smiled because that was the moment everything from the first morning finally made sense in the right order. Paige had asked for my number when she needed help. Now she was hundreds of miles away, had solved the problem without me, and was still the one asking when she could see me again. I replied that Saturday was already reserved. Her answer came back almost immediately. "Good, you're learning." When Paige returned, I did not meet her beside a dead battery, an open hood, or a tire sitting flat against the pavement. I was waiting outside the restaurant we had chosen for Saturday night when her Honda pulled into the parking lot under its own power. Paige climbed out, walked around the car, and stopped in front of me with the kind of smile that had caused most of my problems since the morning we met. "Made it all the way back without calling you once." I told her I was deeply offended. I thought mechanics wanted customers to become independent. Terrible business model. Paige laughed, put her arms around me and kissed me before I could find another joke. Later, while we were waiting for a table, she looked toward the parking lot and said asking for my number beside that flat tire had turned out to be surprisingly useful. I told her the flat tire was probably the least important thing we fixed that morning. Paige groaned immediately. That was almost romantic. I told her not to spread it around because I had a reputation at the shop. She slipped her hand into mine anyway, and that was enough. The first time I saw Paige, she needed somebody who knew how to get her moving again. By the end, what mattered was that she could get wherever she wanted on her own and still wanted me waiting somewhere along the way. I used to think being useful and being wanted were close enough that the difference did not matter much. Paige made that distinction embarrassingly clear. She never needed me to make her choices for her, and once I stopped trying to justify every step with something practical, choosing her became a lot simpler.
What started on the shoulder of a road looked simple enough. Paige had a flat tire, Reid knew how to fix it, and 15 minutes should have been the end of their connection. Instead, the important part was that Paige did not just want somebody to rescue her. She wanted to understand what she had done wrong, learn the right way to handle the car, and leave the encounter more capable than she had been before. Reid noticed that immediately, even if he was slower to notice why her asking for his number had nothing to do with the spare tire. Their next few meetings kept building on that same tension. Paige used car lessons as an honest reason to spend time with him, but she never pretended to be helpless. She learned how to check fluids, read warning lights, inspect a battery, and think through a problem before calling for help. At the same time, she kept making her interest in Reid increasingly difficult to misread. The age difference gave him pause because she was 23 and finishing college while he was 32 and already established in his career. Paige did not dismiss that concern, but she made one boundary clear. He was allowed to think about the difference, not decide for her what she was supposed to want. The battery problem became the turning point because it removed Reid's favorite excuse. Paige fixed the issue herself, exactly as he had taught her, and Reid realized he was disappointed not because she no longer needed him, but because he had wanted a reason to see her. Coffee after that had nothing to do with a broken car, and neither did the dinner he finally asked her to. Once he stopped waiting for mechanical problems to create opportunities, their relationship became much more straightforward. He liked her, she liked him, and the next step did not require another repair lesson. Paige's road trip tested that lesson in a different way. Reid could have turned concern into control, especially knowing she would be traveling alone for weeks, but he chose not to. He trusted the skills she had learned, asked her to check in because he cared, and let the trip remain hers. When she found a nail in her tire hundreds of miles away, she handled the problem safely without him, and then immediately asked about dinner when she got back. That was the clearest answer he could have received. Paige had become more independent, not less, and she still wanted Reid in her life. By the time she returned, the flat tire that introduced them had almost become beside the point. Reid had first been useful because he knew something Paige did not. What made the relationship work was that he eventually understood usefulness was never the same thing as being chosen. The age gap is probably the part that gives this story its real tension, but I think the way Reid handles it matters more than the number itself. He notices that he and Paige are in different stages of life, says so openly, and does not pretend the difference is meaningless. At the same time, he listens when Paige tells him that caution cannot become a polite way of overruling her choices. That keeps the relationship from turning into a story where one person claims to know what is best for the other. There's another detail I like even more. Reid's attraction becomes clearer as Paige needs him less. She learns the things he teaches her, solves the battery problem, manages the road trip, and deals with the nail in her tire without waiting to be rescued. None of that pushes him away. It forces him to separate the satisfaction of being useful from the much more vulnerable experience of simply wanting somebody who is perfectly capable without him. That is why the ending works. Paige does not prove her affection by depending on Reid. She proves it by continuing to choose him after the practical reason for keeping him around has disappeared. So where do you think Reid's real decision happened? When Paige asked for his number, when she made the age difference clear, or when she fixed the battery and he realized he still wanted to see her? I'm curious which moment changed the relationship for you. Share your take below. Enjoy slow burn romances built on small choices? Leave a like and subscribe for the next story.